Hello, good morning. See, some of my students have wanted that I should try to help them regarding writing answers for sociology questions in the exam. And they wanted me to give some model answers. So I have decided to have a brief talk with you on one, how to write answers, and randomly I have selected few questions for which I shall be reading out the model answers. Here I'll be taking only a few questions, maybe 4 or at the most 5. But I shall do this exercise more often, covering up questions both from paper 1 and paper 2. Now, first principle, as far as writing an answer in the sociology optional, or for that matter any other optional, is concerned, that candidate should respect the question. That means they should take the question seriously and understand the exact or the precise meaning of the question. Every question poses a specific query and demands a very specific answer. And I have noted over the years that this is where even hardworking, sincere students go wrong. They go wrong because they don't try to clearly understand the question. And they just end up writing down all the sociological information which they know on the topic. Their answers are totally unfocused. They don't hit the bullseye. So this is one principle that every candidate writing the civil services exam has to keep in mind. This is particularly important because this dimension is not given enough importance in the examinations at the university level. At the university level, the students pour out all information they have on the topic, leaving it for the examiner to select the relevant one. But that is not the case with UPSC exam. The examiner demands absolutely relevant answers. See, all the candidates should understand that information alone is not a virtue. Knowing sociology is not enough. They have to have an ability to mold that information as per the precise demand of the question. That is where lies the virtue. It is this ability for which they will be rewarded. And second principle that is required for writing good answers is that the candidates must have total conceptual clarity. Then, thirdly, to the extent possible, the candidate should try to relate their answers to the contemporary social reality. They should cite examples based on what they observe or what they read in the newspapers and so on. Furthermore, there is no need for an artificially crafted introduction for the answer. There is absolutely no need to have an artificially created introduction. In fact, the best thing to write in the introduction is to explain the meaning of the question and, if possible, give a very synoptic view of the answer in the introduction itself. And as far as the conclusion is concerned, that logically follows from the arguments that you have taken up while writing the answer. So, an artificial conclusion is also not called for. So these are some of the suggestions as to how to go about writing your answer. Now, I would suggest that students should practice what I call thought frameworks regularly, almost every day. Now, it is only by repeated practicing of the thought frameworks that they'll gain an ability to organize the ideas quickly according to the slant of the question and to plan out their answer accordingly. And in preparing thought frameworks, they will also develop a practice of picking up contemporary examples. Otherwise, suddenly, if they are doing it for the first time in the exam, in the UPSC examination hall, contemporary examples will not come to their mind. So that practice has to be developed. Now, while preparing thought frameworks, what should they do? First thing, as I said already, that clarity about the meaning of the question is very, very crucial. So every time they come across a question, they should keep the mind blank. When I say keeping the mind blank, what I mean is that mind should not get overcrowded with sociological information. Otherwise, the ideas that come to your mind will pressurize you to write them. So you will not think in terms of the question, you will think in terms of the content that you have in your mind. In the process, you will miss the question. So, at a common sense level, understand the meaning of the question and identify the area of relevance of the question. Then Maybe you can raise logical questions about the area of relevance. And in terms of these logical questions only, please think of the content. So there is no virtue in knowing the content unless that is relevant to the demand of the question. Any amount of sociological information, if that is irrelevant to the question, it is garbage. There is no merit or virtue in that. So keep in mind that you have to write absolutely relevantly rather than just filling up the pages. Now, I'll take up a few questions. I have randomly selected 4 questions for which I'll read out the answers. The first question that I am taking up is, it's a simple, straightforward question. What is Marxist notion of stratification? Question mark. And how did Weber criticize it? This is a very straightforward question. We know exactly the area of relevance, that we have to briefly describe Marxist notion of stratification, and then we have to talk about Weber's criticism of Marxian model. So I can start the answer like this. Not being an academic sociologist, Marx never tried to develop a systematic theory of stratification. But in his writings, one can find a discussion of the basis, structure, and consequences of stratification. So I have come directly to the point. Now, for Karl Marx, stratification developed when institution of private property came into existence. Prior to that, there was no stratification. Institution of private property led to the division of society into 2 main classes: the ownership class and the non-ownership class. The ownership class controls productive assets and the entire economic activity. By virtue of this control, they exploit the non-owners who contribute their labor to earn the livelihood. Relations between these classes are contractual, exploitative, and antagonistic. And for Marx, inequality tends to be cumulative. That is, the inequality of wealth is the basis for other forms of inequality, that is, inequality of prestige, honor, and of power. So he says that those who control economy also control political power and command prestige for their lifestyle. Focusing on the capitalist society, Marx said that bourgeoisie are the dominant exploitative class and proletariat are the subject class. As capitalism advanced, eventually the proletariat would develop a subjective awareness of the objective reality of exploitation. They will become a class for itself and antagonism would be articulated. Therefore, according to Marx, stratification being exploitative generates conflict. And Marx hoped, rather believed, that conflict will lead to revolutionary change and the institution of private property would be abolished. This would lead to creation of a society without stratification. This was Marx's communist utopia. Now, Weber was among the first to take a critical look at Marxian ideas about class and class conflict in capitalist society. Weber has been called a bourgeois Marx because in his critique, he has only supplemented Marx rather than altogether supplanting Marx's notion of stratification. According to Weber, Marxian notion of stratification can be justified if it is regarded as an ideal type construction and not a general theory of stratification. As a general theory of stratification, it tantamounts to monocausal economic determinism, which is, according to Weber, an oversimplification of reality. Weber criticized Marx's concept of class as well. For Weber, classes are based on market situation because it is the market situation which determines life chances. And therefore, classes exist or class-based stratification exists only in capitalist societies. Further, Weber rejected Marx's view on inevitability of revolutionary change. Weber did not believe the assumptions that Marx had made, which led him to the conclusion that there is bound to be a revolutionary change. That is, Marxian thesis of pauperization, immiserization, homogenization and polarization. For Weber, revolution at best is a rare possibility. Weber also criticized Marxian view that stratification tend to be cumulative. For Weber, the three axes along which stratification can exist, the axis of wealth, the axis of prestige and axis of power, these three axes need not necessarily overlap. Though he admitted that with extraordinary regularity they do. but sometimes they may not. This is a question which has to be empirically decided. So, cumulative character of inequality cannot be presumed beforehand. And Weber also rejected Karl Marx's view that society without stratification is possible. Weber pointed out that even in the communist society, where the institution of private property has been abolished, the inequality based on unequal distribution of wealth may decline, but hierarchy of statuses and hierarchy of power would persist, and that was indeed found to be the case. So this is about Weber's critique of Marxian theory of stratification. Now, you might have noted that I have tried my best to stay close to the question, not to deviate from the question. Now, the next question I am taking up is not as explicit and simple as far as the wording is concerned. The language of the question is not so explicit and simple. The question says, does collapse of functionalism and bankruptcy of Marxism coincide with the rupture of modernity? Discuss. So while we discuss, we have to see how valid is this statement. And when we question the validity of the statement, we look at the alternate viewpoint. But whenever there is a question based on a statement, never ever out of hand reject the statement saying that it is wrong. Rather, most statements are valid and there is an element of truth in them. So it is with this assumption we start, and therefore first thing we will do is explain the meaning of the statement, the context in which the statement is made, and then we will try to justify how the statement is valid. So this statement has been made by perhaps those who belong to postmodernist point of view. This statement refers to changes in society as a result of which some of the well-established theories and concepts have become maybe outdated. So I'll first try to justify the statement. The project of modernity began with enlightenment and the rise of capitalist industrial society. It emphasized on the efficacy of scientific method, the idea of social progress leading to democratic equality, emancipation and dignity of individual, and a rational organization of society. This was the hope offered by the concept of modernity, that human society is advancing in this direction. In this context, functionalism emerged as the scientific method to explain how modern society persisted, as can be seen in the writings of Talcott Parsons and also R.K. Merton. In Merton, we do find an attempt to explain change in society to some degree, but the major emphasis remains on equilibrium or stability of the modern society. Similarly, Marxism also prophesied that progress of modernity would eventually lead to communist utopia. Now, as a result of the changes in the contemporary advanced industrial societies, functionalism has collapsed as a scientific methodology because it failed to account for the changes that characterize advanced industrial societies. Simultaneously, the bankruptcy of Marxism also became evident as the removal of the Iron Curtain in the communist societies revealed that communism was a myth. What masqueraded as communism was only state capitalism. So that is how the various changes in advanced industrial societies could not be comprehended and explained either by using functionalist approach or by using Marxist approach. So there was disillusionment with scientific method and meta-narratives like Marxism. And it is said that this disillusionment coincided with the rupture of modernity. The concept of rupture of modernity refers to a discontinuity in the process of modernization. That advanced industrial societies have moved in a new direction, not anticipated by modernity. They have witnessed changes like emergence of international conflict in an age of weapons of mass destruction, environmental crisis which seems to defy solutions, rise of fascism and totalitarianism in mass societies, growing global social inequality, and rampant consumerism. These changes show a movement away from the goals of modernity. And these changes therefore have led to pessimism and skepticism about the promises of modernity. The critiques of modernity claim that there is a rupture of modernity and a postmodern society is emerging. However, this claim has been contested. For example, Anthony Giddens believed that there is no rupture of modernity. What he says is that we are witnessing the emergence of radically modern society rather than a postmodern society. So that is the debate about rupture of modernity. Now, I'll take up the third question. The third question says, even in open systems of stratification, education does not ensure upward mobility for all sections of society. Discuss. The meaning of the question is that in open systems of stratification which encourage mobility, and education remains an important avenue of mobility, but it does not work to the advantage of all. Especially those from the deprived strata continue to be deprived in spite of universalization of education. Education fails to help them gain mobility. That is what we have to discuss. So we have to see the reasons why this is so. So the logical question is, first we have to very briefly talk about open system of stratification. Second thing we have to talk about is what is the role of education in mobility. And third question we have to talk about is how education fails to benefit all. So, coming to the answer, we'll say in open systems of stratification, norms prescribe or encourage upward mobility for all. The society is supposed to be based on meritocratic principle, and it emphasizes on equality of opportunity. Next, education is a major avenue of mobility. Education is open to all and serves as the basis for recruitment to occupational roles. However, in practice, education does not ensure upward mobility for all sections, because as long as there is social inequality, there is inequality of educational opportunity too. So to answer how education fails to provide mobility, we will look at the viewpoint of Pierre Bourdieu. He pointed out that in hierarchical societies, education serves as an instrument of cultural reproduction. The educational curricula are based on the dominant culture, that means culture of the middle and upper classes, and middle and upper class students possess cultural capital which lower classes lack. Cultural capital determines educational performance. So due to lack of cultural capital, lower class students perform poorly and drop out of the education system early. And they continue to be in the lower strata, having failed to gain upward mobility because they cannot aspire for occupational roles which carry high rewards. Furthermore, students from the lower strata lack values of deferred gratification, which is very crucial to excel in the education system. They lack values of achievement motivation also. They tend to be fatalistic and they have to bear high opportunity cost to stay in the education system. Even the teachers who belong to middle class tend to be biased against the children from the lower classes. And the prejudice of the teachers adversely affects the academic performance of the children. Moreover, there is a hierarchy among educational institutions. Middle and upper class children attend superior schools, while lower class children tend to be enrolled in inferior schools and suffer from educational deprivation. Thus, pupils from deprived sections remain educationally deprived too and fail to gain upward mobility in adult life. So this is about failure of education to provide upward mobility to the poor. Now, I'll take up the last question for today. The question is, do you think I and me are central terms in Meads' work? What does the question mean? The question is asking us whether the concept of I and me in Meads' ideas have a very important role, crucial role. So we have to highlight the importance of the concept of I and me. So we can start the answer by saying that the primary focus of Meads' work is about formation of human personality through the development of self in society. In this context, I and me are central terms because they constitute the structure of the self. According to Mead, self develops through a process of reflexive role taking, and it has two parts or phases. Me is that part of the self which is shaped by the expectation of generalized others. That means of the society, the collectivity. It is the society implanted in the individual, and it leads to conformist behavior. But Mead believed that individual personality is not totally shaped and determined by societal expectations. Although without society, no self-identity can develop. According to Mead, I is the other part of the self which is free from societal control. He even called it the savage self. So I is the unpredictable part of the self through which we often surprise ourselves. It is the source of creativity and novelty. It also leads to deviance. Thus, through the concept of I and me, Mead could explain both continuity and change in society, as well as conformity and deviance, and even conflict. He also linked the terms of social evolution to the concept of I and me. In simple societies, me part of the personality is more dominant, while in modern industrial societies, I part tends to be more developed. So that is how the concept of I and me play a central role in Mead's writings.